Well, welcome everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Jesse Cordray, who serves as the Public Policy Project Manager at the Indiana Farm Bureau. Prior to Indiana Farm Bureau, Cordray served as Deputy Director of Legislative Affairs at the Indiana State Department of Ag and as a Legislative Assistant and Press Secretary in the Indiana Senate. Thank you and welcome, Jesse.
Good afternoon, all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. In hopes that this works. Can you guys see my PowerPoint okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you guys here this afternoon. Kind of an informal presenter. So if there's questions or other thoughts and comments you'd like to have kind of throughout the presentation, feel free to. I know in this format, sometimes it can be a challenge to kind of present your thought, but as we unmute to make those comments, please feel free to do so. Again, my name is Jesse Cordray. I serve as the Public Policy Project Manager at Indiana Farm Bureau. I have the privilege and opportunity of working with a lot of our counties, 92 county farm bureaus, to develop our policy positions for the organization year over year. So the Indiana State policy book that farm bureaus, lobbyists use at the State House is kind of my bread and butter day in and day out. So from a policy perspective, well-versed at least in what our positions are when we speak to members in the Indiana General Assembly. But given my background, working at the Department of Ag and the State Senate, have some unique insights into some of the challenges or opportunities that you all have before you to date. So I just wanted to get started. I kind of cherry picked a handful of bills that I think are of interest, at least for a discussion point here today. Again, feel free to ask questions or use the chat function, Chris, if you've got those. So without further ado, wanted to get started with some of the bills that are before the Indiana Senate at this point. Getting started first with Senate Bill 14. That bill is the Vegetable Gardens and Livestock Bill. For those that are kind of familiar with Senator Dorio's passion projects, over the last several years, he's tried to pass legislation on a right to food, right to farm bills. This is kind of an abbreviated agreement that the industries have had to support, I think, what's at the core or at what he's most passionate about. And so I've kind of, just for reference, I know that we've got members from kind of a variety of areas. So just wanted to let you guys know that I've put as many legislators that have signed on to the bills we'll talk about today in hopes to kind of bring some recognition and, to not only them, but also to kind of the larger conversation and how we kind of convene beyond party lines and from north, south, east, and west in the state of Indiana. So Senate Bill 14 is currently now before the Indiana House of Representatives. It was heard in the Local Government Committee in the Senate, passed out unanimously. There was an amendment to that bill, and that amendment basically dealt more with the siting points for residential areas when it comes to communities and fixed confined spaces. But what it effectively does is it prohibits a county, city, or town from adopting or enforcing an ordinance that prevents a person from cultivating a vegetable garden on certain properties. It allows a unit to adopt or enforce an ordinance or regulation that imposes the same standards and requirements as those imposed on certain properties. So think like certain livestock pieces and what otherwise is already an existing code, but affords some protections to those homeowners who want to begin homesteading or want to expand their operation and otherwise may not have been able to under existing laws. So this kind of it both enforces what's maybe already there, but also affords some new protections for those that wish to diversify their operation. And then lastly, it allows a unit to adopt ordinances and regulations regarding the keeping of livestock on the property. The second bill in the Senate, this is a bill that hasn't moved yet. Not sure that it will this time by, but it at least presents an interesting discussion. Senate Bill 277, authored by Senator Yoder, is the Indiana Grown Produce for Students program. It establishes, under the bill, it would establish an Indiana Grown Produce for Students program to improve the nutrition and eating habits for children through the school setting while investing in the state's agriculture and related food business economy. It would establish the Indiana Grown Produce for Students Fund to provide grants to eligible schools for the reimbursement for certain expenses. and would provide that an eligible school may receive a total grant amount based on the number of meals served by the eligible school during the previous school year. Again, this gets a lot to the idea of supporting the Indiana Grown program, but also having that kind of buy local, support local function with vegetable production. And lastly, it would require the Department of Education to develop guidelines to award grants for the fund, among a few other things. Again, big picture, this has a fiscal piece to it, and a lot of those fiscal bills at this point, understanding it's a budget session, have kind of been kept from the process because we found that there's likely to be some reductions in overall state funding as the new administration comes to terms with our current budget position. So again, Senate Bill 277, authored by Senator Yoder. And then my last Senate bill I thought for discussion today would be Senate Bill 474. It's authored by Senator Lakeisha Jackson of Indianapolis. This gets to a lot of the food desert issues that are widely felt in our more urban areas. But to that end, this would establish a food desert grant program within the Indiana Department of Health to assist with new and existing retail businesses or nonprofits that are looking to offer fresh and unprocessed foods. Again, trying to help better improve the health and well-being of our communities. We've had a lot of different community gardens and others that are engaged in those discussions, farmers markets. And so how we can take those unused goods and keep them at good use while they're still viable, and opportunities that are presented there. So 474 would provide a grant. It would be awarded to establish new retail grocery stores to renovate, expand, or upgrade existing retail business. We know that some of the big box chain stores have moved themselves out of kind of that urban, suburban setting. And so as those spaces sit idle and empty, ways that we can come in and help support those discussions and that infrastructure for good systems, good food systems. It would go on to require the Department of Health to consider certain criteria for what that would be. It would require for them to report kind of to the General Assembly as to how well and how productive these programs are. Again, because of the fiscal imprint, it's not likely that this concept moves forward, but again, is an important point to have the conversation. And so that's kind of our Senate bills, at least at this point, that I felt for this kind of conversation would maybe be worth the update. I know that as we get to the House bills, there's certainly more interest and I think more discussion had on some of these issues. And so to get started, we kind of get and jump into the kind of the thick of it. But House Bill 1562 is the Farm and Home-Based Food Sales Bill. It's authored by Representative Hunter Smith of Zionsville. This is his first term in the Indiana General Assembly. It's co-authored by Representative Green, Representative Culp, and Representative Lindauer. Interesting enough, for the way that the House initially put this bill before committees, was the Committee on Public Health. I think in part because of the county health departments that have a vested interest in home-based vendors, but was later reassigned to the House Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development. Just kind of a quick timeline for you on the bill. On January 30th, the House Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development voted 8-3 to advance the bill to the full House. I wanted to take note of it. Let me see if I can hide this piece so others can see, of the members that voted in support and those that voted against the bill. There were two folks that came to testify in the committee hearing. Both were of health department influence, from Marion County and Hendricks County. A lot of their opposition stemmed from concern that doing away or kind of moving away from the existing statutes on home-based vendors and the protections afforded in some of the certification standards that home-based vendors would have to operate within for consumer protection may be lapsed and would otherwise present a public safety, public health issue. On Monday, February 10th, so this week, Representative Smith offered an amendment on the floor. It prevailed by a voice vote, meaning that there was no further discussion. No one asked for a roll call vote. And a lot of what that amendment did was put back some of the protections that are currently afforded in existing code from a consumer perspective. It brought back in some of the temperature, the meat pieces that otherwise were kind of exempt from this. And a lot of the impetus in the discussion Representative Smith has brought for the discussion is trying to deregulate and kind of afford an entrepreneurial spirit to food production under an agricultural lens. And so given a lot of the nuanced discussion between the local, state, and federal from a legal standpoint, a regulatory framework, There's interest at trying to decouple that and make it a little bit more of an easier entry point for those that are looking to diversify their on-farm operation. I'm happy to send slides here after this, but just if you're curious for the discussions that came and went, I time-stamped it from session on when he presented the amendment and some of the discussion that he at least had, again, with the spirit of trying to deregulate and inspire diversification within the ag space. And so it is before the full House as of today. It's likely that it'll be the vote will be had here this afternoon. Session was to begin at about 1:30. So I just put this in here as kind of a footnote for you all to kind of be mindful of that. House Bill 1562 could receive a vote today, and if so, and it prevails, it'll move to the full Senate here at the second half. I guess speaking directly now that the bill has been amended, it would still repeal some of the home-based vendor regulations. It would provide that the Indiana Department of Health, a local unit of government, that the Health and Hospital Corporation of Marion County, or a local health department may not impose any rules, regulations, certifications, or licensing requirements on a small farm or home-based vendor that are not required under federal law. Part of the discussion that occurred in the House Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development, a committee member who also serves as chair of the House Committee on Public Health, Representative Brad Barrett of Richmond, had some concerns on whether or not the bill really did what maybe it was being alleged to do. And so part of it has to do with the FDA has a lot of rules out, and whether or not those are existing laws. That, and in addition to the existing laws, does it mean that the state doesn't have to have them on our books, right? Federal law supersedes state and local law. And so just because it's not in state law and there's been some repealing doesn't in fact mean that it's not already on the books. I think Representative Smith has an honest passion for this. And I think a lot of what his intent to do is to try and make it more of a streamlined, easy to understand industry and ways, again, that farmers can diversify their on-farm operation. And so it would exempt public buildings used by small farms and home-based vendors from certain public building regulations. Again, right at the intent to say that not all startups have the means or the financial means to be as big as their competitors. And so trying to find that necessary balance between barrier to entry and opportunity. Again, he revisits the entrepreneurial spirit. Those in the committee also talked about the governor's, the new governor's proposal to try and find an entrepreneurial spirit in the state of Indiana. And so they're using this as kind of a way in which we can further enhance ag across the state of Indiana. My background in the Indiana Senate, I worked for Senator Jean Lysing, and she helped support the bill in 2022 that helped maybe make a little bit more of the regulatory framework for home-based vendors. But I kind of thought it was maybe worth kind of revisiting some of those discussions again, just because it's been 3 years since that bill was enacted, signed into law, and we're looking to kind of walk back some of those protections and enhancements that we otherwise thought at that time in history would help further support home-based vendors. And so in 2022, House Bill 1149 was authored by Representative Don Leahy, co-authored by Representative Claire, Davison, and Bauer. It was sponsored in the Senate by Senator Jean Lysing, Greg Walker, and Lonnie Randolph. It specified at that point, so under existing law to date, it would specify that requirements for the preparation and sale of food products as a home-based vendor. It reorganized some of the provisions concerning the sale of certain food products by an individual vendor at a farmer's market or roadside stand. A lot of the conversation then was the opportunity to sell meat, specifically rabbits was a point of conversation. Another discussion that came up at that point had to do with eggs. And the egg board and others kind of weighed in again, trying to make the section a little bit more easily to understand. A lot of it was read here and go there. And so they tried to make some conforming changes to the overall structure of the title in hopes that those that are trying to become or further their operation within the home-based vendor, that they're not stuck to trying to understand some of the regulatory framework and miss out on others and be subjected to fees, fines, and otherwise. And then lastly, it required an individual who sells poultry, rabbits, and eggs at a farmer's market or a roadside stand to comply with certain requirements. Those requirements were the food safety handler certificate program. We worked with partners at Purdue in hopes that we could begin to bridge the conversation with members, again, that are trying to come into this diversified space, that there's an affordable way that they can understand within their right what they're able to produce within their home. So that's kind of the 2022 to 2025 piece on the home-based vendors and kind of how we got to where we are to date. It'll be interesting to see what comes of the conversation here this next part of session. The Senate generally is pretty rigid in some of their overall regulatory kind of compliance piece. I think that there's a lot of discussion on ensuring that consumers have access to not just quality food, but also it's that safe element to it. And many of the conversations that existed in 2022, I think, would maybe remain in place to date about wanting to make sure that there is a level of safe food safety compliance that home-based vendors have to adhere to. The big push, and I think the compromise that existed then in 2022 that we have to date, is that none of those counties could be more stringent than what state law had. So there was many instances where counties were subject to stiffer regulations or oversight from their county health departments. And so we tried to make conforming changes with the Department of Health to ensure that counties had the resources they needed to be able to evaluate home-based vendors, roadside stands, farmers markets that weren't overly onerous or too much of a burden from a regulatory perspective, that folks felt that they could sell quality produce, quality goods to consumers in kind of a direct to consumer approach. And so that's kind of the big difference, I think, between the home-based vendors of 2022 and 2025. Certainly not speaking for members in the General Assembly to date on the appetite to make the changes, just from a historical context of kind of how we were then, where we got to now. I think a lot of this comes back to how can we make and support ag in a space that's entrepreneurial minded and supportive, as opposed to cumbersome regulatory and too much red tape. So that's kind of that 1562 discussion. Again, just felt like it was maybe worth revisiting the 1149 as kind of how we got to here. And then lastly, from a bill perspective, is 1602. It's a various food matters bill. Representative Kendall Culp has filed it. Not surprising that the co-author is Representative Hunter Smith. Again, ways that we can continually make our food systems more readily available from on-farm to consumer. It was first referred to the House Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development. It passed unanimously on the 6th of February and was recommitted to the House Committee on Courts and Criminal Code because it adds provisions concerning limited meat product sales. And so much of that code is reflected in the home-based vendor statute. This specifically, the bill's intent deals with alternative meat products as a labeling piece and a compliance piece to be labeled as an imitation meat product. But the overarching discussion when it comes to meat product sales is to afford meat that's been inspected, but I guess it wasn't inspected by a meat inspector, but from a meat inspected facility that's certified to be able to sell that direct from farm. And so to date, as I kind of understand the discussion, if I take it to a meat processor, the meat processor sells it, I still am entitled to the meat. However, what this would now allow, if passed and signed into law, is those that process meat to be able to return the meat to on farm and then sell from the farm. And so as consumers come to the farm, certainly in an agritourism piece, they're able to buy some expanded meat opportunities that otherwise aren't currently afforded or protected in code. And so that's what House Bill 1602 would do if passed and signed into law as it's been presented. But those are kind of some of the big overarching policy points that we thought was maybe pertinent for this group to kind of have and to understand. I'm happy to go back and review any of those bills that we've talked about before I kind of move on to another piece of the presentation, if there's any questions.
I don't see any in the chat, but Pam or anybody, just go ahead and unmute.
I don't have any questions at this time. It's informative.
Awesome. Well, I'll kind of switch gears a little bit and not completely understanding the room as far as whether or not anyone's a Farm Bureau member, but those that may have interest or would like a little bit of a deeper understanding on kind of how we formulate our policies that we go to the General Assembly for. Again, our structure is we have 92 county farm bureaus. Those farm bureaus meet from basically November through May 1st and formulate policy positions, either in the affirmative position to support policy, or those that are against, that they want to oppose. And so we've developed a pretty comprehensive policy book. There's 25 titles that are very wide ranging. Our most recent title edition was Title 25 that came 2 years ago. It's a rule viability title. But what it effectively is and means is that we're a grassroots, bottom to top organization. And we take great pride in the fact that we have members that engage in the process and help refine our policy book and our positions to enhance and further the interests of agriculture and rural communities. And so my day-to-day job is working with those counties to formulate those policy positions. And then we spend the summer and fall months getting the policy book through a pretty rigorous process with our voting members. We have a group in July that meets. It's through our resolutions committee, but it's a group of 24 voting members that review and refine the policy book. And once they've reviewed that, they vote it. It then goes before a complete delegate body in August. We have about 275 to 300 members that come and review the policy line for line, word for word. And once that's voted, that's the official policy position of Indiana Farm Bureau for the next year. Given that the passions and maybe the interest points for you all, I went through and kind of lifted a few of the titles and some of the subsections within those titles that I think are relevant for discussion either today or for you to consider. These titles, our first title is kind of our general agricultural policy title. It specifically talks with some of the urban county farm bureau coalitions. Again, those titles kind of work to support some of the work that farmers markets and other civic community organized groups like yourselves would deal with day to day. We have a title that's diversified ag, value add, retail agriculture. That's specifically a lot of the home-based vendors, farmers market language. But within that, we have some organic farming positions, and then pollinators for those that choose to sell honey. Throughout the book, though, as we get to Title VI, we certainly have a food safety and labeling section, again, that I think is maybe relevant, ripe for discussion today. And then within Title 21, we have a nutrition and health section that deals a lot with the SNAP WIC and other things. But again, at trying to find affordable ways that we can sell produce direct to consumer. And so comprehensively, for those that would like to engage in the discussion, we have policy advisory groups. Specifically, we have a diversified agriculture policy advisory group that meets to discuss and surface a lot of the growing trends and issues we have within the industry, and hopes to be able to find and formulate policy positions that we then can go and represent the voices of agriculture in the State House. We do the same with the American Farm Bureau Federation. We just recently got back from their national delegate meeting that voted on the book that the American Farm Bureau Federation will use for the next calendar year. But again, those kind of work in tandem. But ultimately, when you think about the local impact, they have kind of across the board impact. And so the activities that we do at the federal level, of course, come down to the locals. What happens at the state level comes down to the locals. And so, and working with 92 county farm bureaus and finding those policy positions that they want of the organization, we're able to effectuate change even at the local level. And so as conversations are occurring here over the next several months, as we work to get our policy positions in order for the next calendar year, we welcome open discussion. We routinely engage in kind of a roundtable discussion point sometime over the summer into the fall. With different groups. And so we've had groups approach us from a variety of different backgrounds, trying to come with the right mindset and kind of synergy to help get policies moved across the finish line in the General Assembly. And so as policy issues come up, certainly from a regulatory framework or even just an existing law that Indiana Farm Bureau can be of service to you all for, those that aren't members, we would encourage you to become a member. It's $36, but it's a lot of bang for the buck. And so we take great pride in that opportunity. But more than that, for our members, we're looking to refine our policy process. And so we've got some really exciting changes on the forefront that I'm certainly very passionate about and interested in changing and influencing. But it really takes a complete community approach to getting a lot of this legislation taken care of. And so however we can be of a resource, assistance, we have a State House team that's pretty comprehensive, and we would welcome the discussion. And so, as questions kind of come up, I'm happy to field those now, or as they come up here over the next several weeks and months. This is my email, and that's my direct cell phone number. That you have that. And then as we distribute the slides, this link here will take you to our state policy book that's on our website. And there's some other resources there on some of the policy priorities the organization has currently that you could read and learn a little bit more about. So again, I don't want to spend too much time talking, but happy to revisit any of these policies or other things that we can help answer for you here this afternoon.
Thank you, Jesse. I do have some questions. Does Farm Bureau offer technical support for local, city, or county government considering passing ag-related policy?
Yes. So Colette Childress is on our team. She is our local government affairs person. She works a lot within the local zoning ordinance and other issues that are before municipal governments. And so she's a great contact and resource. So as those questions come up, she certainly can help advise or at the least help direct some of those discussions. As they rise to bigger issues when it comes to zoning and other challenges, we have the Ag Law Foundation, John Shoup, who can help direct some of those more legal focused questions and challenges. And so we work closely with the Ag Law Foundation. Any other questions? You guys are a quiet group.
There is a question about the.
Oh, sorry. Look at the chat.
There was a question about the policies.
Yeah, of Indiana Farm Bureau. I can see if I can stop sharing and pull this up, and I can send that to you guys. So this is our policy book, and then the second attachment will talk about our state priorities. And Christine, I don't know if you want us to kind of go a little bit of an overview of where Farm Bureau's bigger overarching policy priorities are this time by. They're a little different than maybe what the group would have, but I'm happy to kind of go over that also.
Yeah, I mean, that would be nice just to.
Okay. Yeah, just kind of an overall kind of update. So Indiana Farm Bureau has two big priority issues that we've been charged by not only our membership, but our board of directors. The first of which is water reform. And so for those kind of in the north central Indiana area or who have kind of tuned into the ongoing conversation around the Lebanon LEAP project, a lot of conversation and consternation on water use, water access, and water protection. And so Indiana Farm Bureau, at the direction of our membership, had a water task force assembled with some of our most passionate members and those that work within the industry, from drainage to just overall large consumers with big irrigation wells. We kind of took a more comprehensive look at existing statute and tried to find a way that we can level the playing field and find some parity for the industry. And so Indiana's a riparian right state, so kind of the biggest straw wins. And so for us to find and feel that we had some necessary protections, we kind of leveled the playing field with Senate Bill 28. And so Senator Sue Glick, who chairs the Senate Committee on Natural Resources, has been the author of that bill. That bill is now on second reading in the Senate. But what it effectively does is it gives a process for those that have been adversely impacted. Their wells have run dry. Think from a livestock perspective, they go to turn the spigot, there's no water. Before, you'd have to sue kind of in due process that way to find the responsible party liable. Now, under Senate Bill 28, what it would afford is a self-reporting opportunity. So your well runs dry. You send a written comment to the Department of Natural Resources. They come out, they do an inspection, they find the responsible party liable, that party now is required to compensate you. Now, the compensation piece isn't they write you a check as much as they're now required to either dig your well deeper or get you connected to municipal water. And so we think it's a positive step forward. It's kind of been likened to gain an inch and take a mile. It's taken a lot of time and discussion with some of the big water users across the state of Indiana to ensure that the necessary protections are fair and equitable. From our perspective, we want to make sure that when this happens, should this happen, that there's some protections in place that help absolve that issue. And so the bill's been amended a few ways. As it stands to date, we're not in complete support of the bill. We've gotten commitments from not only the bill author, but those that are looking to sponsor the bill in the House to continually have that discussion. So the initial bill draft was 48 hours. So within 48 hours, the Department of Natural Resources would have to come out. It later was revised to 72 hours. In the Senate Appropriations Committee, it was revised to 5 to 7 business days. As you can imagine, from a livestock producer's perspective, 5 to 7 days is very, 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 very troubling when you're without water. And so we're looking to maybe find a better balance to that and what we can do to move it forward. But that's kind of the water piece. On the other side of it, we're taking a more concerted look. There's certainly a lot of discussion on property taxes, and we're looking to fine tune the farmland formula and property taxes under an agricultural lens. And so kind of the high and the low, and it changes every day because of the conversations that are taking place. But we're looking to refine the capitalization rate and set it at 10%, and in hopes, in addition to some other things, that we get the curve and volatility of the rising and fluctuating property tax assessments our members are facing year over year, that there's a more fair, equitable, and expected rate. We've seen volatility rise from 20 something percent one year to a high 20 the next year. And so a lot of what the conversation has become is how can we change that? We want to do that with the farmland formula. And so that's being done through a few different bills. It's currently in part to House Bill 1192, which is authored by Representative Kendall Culp. There's another bill, Senate Bill 7, that's been authored by Senator Buchanan that does some, but much of the same. And so from the conversations we've been privy to, at least at this point, there, I think, is a lot of themes from other bills that are likely to be folded into one so that there's a more honest, genuine budget forecast to know kind of the winners and losers, and trying to not completely have a patchwork solution to this, but more of a comprehensive solution. And so the new administration has outlined property tax reform, ag property tax reform as a priority. And so Farm Bureau has been engaged in these conversations over the last year in anticipation of this session. Much like the water task force, we had a tax task force that met. We had members from across the state, from local elected officials to general members to CPAs, kind of coming together to try and formulate a sound policy that we could support this time by in the General Assembly. And so knowing it's a budget year, knowing we've had discussions and trying to further educate members on the burdens that agriculture feels on bare ground over the last few sessions, where they've taken property taxes and shifted some of the burden, if you will, from residential users. The bare ground is still holding a brunt of that weight. And we're just trying to find a more equitable solution that works for agriculture. And so as profits continually decline, input costs and other pressures continually rise, there's a disadvantage here that we're hoping to find more parity for. So Katrina Hall's leading that discussion for our team. She's been engaged in many of the conversations and kind of spearheaded our tax task force. So more updates from her probably are likely in the coming time. So if there's tax specific questions that you guys have, we can do that. I can direct some of those conversations to Katrina. For those that are members or those that become members, on Fridays during session, we have legislative update calls from noon to 1 o'clock, where you kind of get this, but a little bit more in the weeds discussion on some of the comings and goings of the State House that I think are very, very substantive So you guys kind of have a constant understanding of the work that we're doing in and out of the State House throughout the legislative session. And so with the new administration comes plenty of new challenges. Namely, the biggest challenge is just trying to come up with how are we going to achieve the new administration's priorities. And so in hope to support agriculture and knowing that a few of those priority issues are also front of mind for the new governor, we're optimistic and hopeful we get some solutions and some success here in the next couple of weeks.
Fantastic. Thank you. Anybody have any questions or for Jesse?
So I got a question. Does some of the bills that the local and counties cannot have higher standards than the state and federal level for home-based vendors? So kind of threading the needle in some of that discussion. So the federal law supersedes the rest. And so trying to find a balance between that, I think the intent was to go to one point source and say nothing more than federal regulation. I think some of the nuanced discussion that occurs at the state level, at least, is the things that state code speaks directly to that the federals don't. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I think that's the policy discussion that's being afforded now that 1562 is before the General Assembly again. Is, are there things that the federal code doesn't speak to that we need to have in code? I think part of that was the amendment that Representative Smith offered with the temperature piece and some of the other manufactured pieces in home, and some of the food safety certification pieces, again just affording consumer protection. But I think some of it's to be seen as to what the local imprint will be. Again, we had 2 counties come and testify against the bill as it was presented. I've not seen or heard kind of if their positions have changed since the amendment was adopted in the bills before the full Senate, or I'm sorry, the full House. But I would expect some of those conversations again to continue here into the next several weeks as the bill is likely to pass from the House and be referred to the Senate. So I guess that's something I can keep Christina apprised of as we kind of learn more here in the next few weeks for the group.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to do so.
Any other questions? All right.
Awesome.
Well, I thank you, Jesse, for a fantastic update on topics of importance: farming, home-based vendors, farmers markets. And thank you also for the Farm Bureau update on the water and the taxes. That's definitely important. So,
Absolutely.
oh, there is a question. Would Senate Bill 14 supersede local ordinances if it is approved?
So that I'll have to do a little bit more homework on what the locals currently are able to be preemptive of. But I think more than that, I think the bill gets to the root issue of allowing people who want to raise their own food that opportunity, regardless of where they live. And so I know that there's some ordinances that exist on a poultry, on backyard flocks, and that sort of thing. I don't know where the bill kind of lands now with that on some of those preemptions, but I can get that answered, and I'll send that to Christina and hope she can send that to you, Becky.
Yeah, that's kind of that's so the vegetable part one, I understand. I do know of some cities that do have ordinances against livestock, and I don't see these communities budging in that direction. So that was kind of my question. Anyway, what would happen? Because yeah, I just don't see these communities accepting livestock in their cities, basically.
Yes.
Any thoughts about that? Or
And I just pulled this up. Doesn't talk on beekeeping. Let me read a little bit more on this before. I don't want to be a little ahead of my skis because there's certain points and within certain areas that they're able to preempt, and then in others they're not. So, Christine, I could follow up with you here after the call pretty quickly.
yeah, that's kind of what I suspected. I mean, beekeeping is okay. Vegetable gardens are fine, but I think there's some issues with some communities with regards to if you're going to have chickens, like chickens, turkey, cows. I don't think you would have a cow in any Indiana city, where if you're maybe out west, yes. And then I can't right off the top of my head. Maybe sheep or some of the other livestock, I think
Yes.
would would have to be looked into.
Yes, and part of the bill goes into what the county or a municipal government can decide and determine what livestock, how many, when they can and can't have. But I guess in kind of that piece, what does that look like beyond that? So I'll do a little homework on that
Okay.
and report back.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that because I had read the bill and there wasn't much information about the livestock piece. So
Yeah.
that was a good question. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you, Jesse, and thank you, everyone. That wraps up today's Farmers Market Forum. Please join us tomorrow for 4 more exciting sessions where you learn all about farmers markets and how to best practices on market management. So have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, Christine.